It's Wednesday. It's the 25th of June. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is ARIRANG News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. President Park Geun-hye's scoreboard for Prime Minister nominations is far from perfect, and pundits say it could put the brakes on her reform drive. U.S. federal investigators blame the crew of Boeing and the emergency response in an Asiana Airlines flight crash at San Francisco International Airport nearly a year ago that led to the death of 3 people. And 64 years since the outbreak of the Korean War, the geopolitical equation surrounding the Korean Peninsula looks quite different from how it was or how it did on June 25, 1950. We'll have those stories and more, but first, let's begin right here in South Korea. There is little doubt among political circles and pundits that the resignation of Prime Minister nominee Moon Chang-guk on Tuesday has dealt a heavy blow to President Park Geun-hye. Now, with 2 of her recent picks stepping down even before their confirmation hearings began, it's back to the drawing board for her reform drive. Our Choi Yoo-sun has more.
The withdrawal of President Park's second prime minister nominee in the past month has put the brakes on the president's reform drive brought on by April's ferry disaster. It's been 2 months since Prime Minister Chung Hong-hwan tendered his resignation for the government's lax response to the ferry accident, and the search for his successor has gone back to square one. There's a lineup of cabinet minister nominees awaiting confirmation hearings, and the details of a government restructuring plan remain in limbo. The back-to-back personnel appointment failures could come at a heavy price for the president and the ruling party ahead of next month's by-elections. There's mounting criticism within both the ruling and opposition parties over the presidential office's personnel verification system, and the opposition is demanding the presidential chief of staff take responsibility. This means lawmakers are likely to go over the president's nominees for 8 cabinet positions and the chief of the state intelligence agency with a fine-tooth comb at their confirmation hearings next month. Some of them have already come under fire, including the nominee to head the National Intelligence Service, Lee Byung-gi, who's been implicated in illegal political funding activities in the past. Education Minister nominee Kim Myung-soo stands accused of plagiarizing students' thesis papers. Although the 9 nominees don't require parliamentary confirmation to be appointed by the president, what is said at their hearings could have an effect on the president and the ruling party. While there's speculation that President Park is likely to select a politician as her next prime minister, opposition co-leader An Cheol-soo has suggested the president consult with political parties before announcing her pick. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
The Korean government has conveyed deep concerns to the U.S. over the results of Japan's review of the Kono Statement, which is its landmark acknowledgment of wartime sex slavery. But over in Tokyo, the government there has started to promote its findings to scholars and experts in the U.S. Our Sohn Jung-in has this report.
Japan's look back at the Kono Statement was one of the key issues Tuesday at vice minister level talks between Korea and the United States.
We discussed various issues related to history in the region, including the result of Tokyo's review of the Kono Statement.
Meeting U.S. Deputy Secretary of State William Burns in Washington, Seoul's Vice Foreign Minister Tae-yong reiterated the Korean government's deep concerns over the Abe administration's review of the 1993 apology. Korea's foreign ministry views the re-examination as Japan's justification based upon its own independent survey and judgment. However, according to diplomatic sources, Japan is actively spreading the findings to scholars and experts at U.S.-based think tanks. Delivering the results through email, Tokyo is unilaterally claiming the Korean and Japanese governments engaged in prolonged negotiations to hammer out the wording of the Kono Statement. Experts are concerned this may give the impression that statement was the result of a diplomatic and political compromise between the 2 countries. The email also gives details that Korean comfort women received compensation as well as medical welfare assistance from Japan. Korea's foreign ministry has denounced Japan's move, saying it will release its own stance on the issue and take proper measures at the international level. Sohn Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
Well, shifting our focus to Seoul's National Assembly, the Parliamentary Defense Committee will hold a Q&A session this Wednesday on the latest shooting rampage at a frontline army unit that left 5 soldiers dead and 7 others wounded over the past weekend. Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin, who has been tapped to become President Park Geun-hye's top security advisor, will appear and answer questions from lawmakers about what may have caused that rampage carried out by a 22-year-old army sergeant. Now, lawmakers are widely expected to accuse the military of poor personnel management and question countermeasures to prevent a similar incident from ever happening again. And also up for discussion will be the timing of a confirmation hearing for Defense Minister-designate Han Min-gu. Exactly 64 years ago today, on June 25, 1950, war broke out on the Korean Peninsula when armed forces from North Korea smashed into the South. More than 600,000 South Korean soldiers fought in that war, and nearly a third of them are still alive today. Our Connie Lee met one of them who says the war should never be forgotten.
Around this time every year, he can't help but think of his brothers.
Although we fought in the war together, there are those still living today, while others died young. It still breaks my heart.
87-year-old Lee Chun-lak shows me the names of some of his veteran brothers from the Korean War, engraved in the black marble walls at one memorial hall. Lee's name is one of them. Rewind 64 years back. Lee was just a 23-year-old schoolteacher who had to trade in his books for combat boots as he was drafted into the war.
Because they were short on soldiers, if you were young, you were enlisted into the army. That was September 1950.
At his home, evidence of his time in the war are on the walls, in photographs and in letters. One letter dates back to 1953, written by one of his closest compatriots in his platoon, a U.S. soldier who went by the name Smitty.
There was an American soldier named Smith, Kenneth Smith. We were practically together everywhere.
Once the war ended and after a few letter exchanges here and there, they lost touch. Lee's been on the search for his American friend since then.
How great would it be to see each other after all of these years? When I see him, I want to tell him that we're more than just brothers.
Along with the memories of camaraderie are also the harrowing memories of war that not only left hundreds of thousands dead, but separated thousands of Korean families once that 38th parallel was drawn and divided the nation. Lee says he hopes the realities of the Korean War, along with all the sacrifices that were made, will never be forgotten in the generations to come.
The fact that our country exists today is from the sacrifices of the Korean War veterans who put their lives at risk to protect this nation. We cannot forget that.
Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Well, China has been the strongest backer of North Korea since the outbreak of the 3-year Korean War 64 years ago. But recent events have pushed Beijing and Pyongyang apart, and experts say they're unlikely to become best buds again anytime soon. Our Connie Kim tells us more.
Relations between North Korea and China don't look the same as before, and their frosty ties are likely to continue in the foreseeable future. South Korea's Unification Ministry has confirmed that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un did not send a congratulatory message to Chinese President Xi Jinping for his birthday this month, unlike last year when Kim reached out, wishing him to realize his goal of achieving national prosperity. Experts in Korea and China point out that the planned visit to Seoul next month by President Xi, who has never been to Pyongyang as the head of state, suggests the dynamics of Sino-Korean relations appear to be shifting, considering Chinese leaders of the past have made it a point to visit Pyongyang before coming to Seoul. Kim Han-kwon of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies says Beijing appears to be seeking political and other cooperations with Seoul, as well as economic ties.
China used to maintain a balance, using the North for political purposes and the South for economic ones. But this is changing.
And Chinese experts agree. Professor Chu Surong of Tsinghua University at a forum in Beijing on Tuesday said President Xi is trying to put pressure on Pyongyang to end its nuclear development by cutting off some of its economic aids. China has also joined international sanctions since Pyongyang carried out a widely condemned nuclear test in February of last year by stopping to supply crude oil to the north for months and limiting banking transactions with the reclusive state. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
We have been waiting almost a year to find out what went wrong and who was to blame for the crash of Asiana Airlines Flight 214 at San Francisco International Airport nearly a year ago. Well, we've got the answer now. U.S. Safety regulators say last July's crash was mainly caused by the crew's over-reliance and lack of command over the automated system. Our Shin Se-min explains.
Pilot error upon descent and an over-reliance on automated systems. That was the cause of last July's passenger plane crash at San Francisco International Airport, according to the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board. Investigators say Asiana Airlines Flight 214 came in too low and too slow in its landing approach, which caused the plane to slam into a seawall, ripping off the tail and sending the fuselage skidding down the runway. 3 people died and another 200 were injured in the crash. The NTSB added that the trainee pilot of the Asiana flight lacked sufficient training and inadvertently shut off an automatic speed control system that might have prevented the accident. A portion of the blame was also placed on Boeing for the complexities of the autothrottle on the 777 jet.
A lot of issues lined up the wrong way, as it turned out, to produce this result, because each one of those issues probably happens a lot by itself, innocuously, but, and in fact, if you removed any one of those links in the chain, this accident would not have happened. But
Asiana Airlines in a statement said they accept the NTSB's conclusion and that they have been bolstering safety measures since last summer's crash. But the Korean-based airliner also pointed the finger at Boeing, citing inconsistencies with the autothrottle system, which they say led pilots to believe they could maintain the plane speed. Boeing is adamant the airplane performed as expected and that it did not contribute to the accident, saying the 777 has an extraordinary safety record and it is the pilots who were at fault. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Well, day 13 of the 2014 FIFA World Cup was full of action, I tell you. Yes, we did get to find out about half of the teams that will be playing in the knockout stage, but also that some can bite the fun out of the game. Our correspondent Sohn Jung-in joins us to make sure we do not miss any of that action.
We're now halfway through the final matches of the group stage. We now know 50% of the teams that will be in the last 16. The two-time World Cup champion Woga had no trouble moving on to the next round, but it was a troublemaker Luis Suarez's teeth marks that are making more headlines around the globe. Suarez clashed with Italy's Giorgio Chiellini in the Italian penalty area 10 minutes from the end of the match, only to bite the defender on the shoulder. And this is not the first time the striker has beaten an opponent, but the third. Suarez was banned from playing for his Premier League side Liverpool for 10 games last year after biting a Chelsea player, and 4 years ago he was suspended for 7 games for a similar incident while playing for Ajax. The striker could be banned from the rest of the World Cup and possibly even more. Now Costa Rica and England ended 0-0. That did not affect the final Group D standings. The Central American squad easily topped the group, and England were rated to the bottom with just 1 point. Now, it would have been the first for both countries to advance to the next round, but that honor went to Greece as Georgios Samaras earned an invaluable penalty in the last minute to see them edge Cote d'Ivoire 2-1. Over in Cuyaba, Japan packs up after finishing rock bottom of their group as the Christian Colombia cruised the Asian country 4-1 to top out their group with 3 wins. At this point, Korea is the only reigning Asian squad which has a shot at advancing to the next round, although it's a very, very slim chance. Now, these results lead to 3 more Latin American teams landing on the last 16. That adds up to 6 against 2 European countries. Colombia and Uruguay will go against each other in Rio de Janeiro on Saturday, and Costa Rica-Greece match will be in Recife on Sunday, both at 5 p.m. local time. Now, with France and Argentina short to advance to the next round, Nigeria will try to become the first African team to make it to the next round in Brazil. The conclusion of the Group F match is set for 1 p.m. and Group E at 5 p.m. Another very early morning game for the fans here in Korea. And that was your look at today's World Cup actions, and I'll see you guys back here for more stories from Brazil 2014.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-yong live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market. For the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and the Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Korea's household debt problem has reached a critical level. An official with the Korea Development Institute says that Korea's debt-to-income ratio was fairly high compared to that of major OECD nations, and that the growth in debt had outpaced the growth in income. Well, the official adds that the amount of household debt has reached a point at which it could have a negative effect on potential growth and spending. It's considered dangerous when the debt-to-GDP ratio is 85%, and Korea's figure stood at 85.6% last year. To tackle the problem, the KDI official suggested closer inspections of non-banking institutions and their lending practices. But as for the nation's consumer sentiment over the past month, we saw some improvement there, which can be regarded as a sign that the economy may be picking up from the effects of April's deadly ferry disaster. According to the Bank of Korea, the consumer sentiment index stood at 107 in June, which is up 2 points from a month earlier. While the figure still falls short of the 108 level recorded just before the ferry tragedy, it suggests Korean consumers may be returning to their regular spending habits. The monthly index reflects the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans, and a reading over 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. And although consumer sentiment saw a slight improvement, domestic consumption still remains sluggish in this country following April's ferry tragedy. And on this Wednesday, Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry released a report full of suggestions for breathing new life into the economy. Here's our Kim Ji-yeon.
The Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry in a recent report has some suggestions for improving the climate in Korea for foreign investment. The amount of domestic investment in Korea compared to its foreign investment has risen steadily over the past 10 years. The institution attributed this to a reduction in the number of domestic jobs and consumption, and suggested deregulation as a starting point to boost both, particularly in the field of medicine, where Korea possesses one of the highest levels of technologies in the world. To lure in more foreign tourists, the KCCI says the establishment of a for-profit medical corporations should be allowed, like in the United States, Singapore, and Thailand. The number of medical tourists visiting Korea per year is around 1/10 the amount that go to Thailand. The KCCI report also suggested delaying the adoption of stricter regulations concerning the labor environment, which include extending the retirement age, expanding maternal leave, and reducing working hours so that businesses can more easily adapt to changes. Providing incentives for outsourced manufacturers so they can return and invest in Korea were also suggested, along with a revival strategy that mirrors others in the US, Germany, and Japan. In order to boost the country's service sector, the institution says Korea should try to attract at least 10 million tourists from China annually by simplifying the visa process, expanding high-quality accommodations, and fostering service professionals in the tourism sector. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
And now it's time for our daily arts and culture segment with our Im Yoon-hee. She joins me live in the studio for an update today on one of Korea's leading playwrights. So Yoon-hee, you have a leading playwright for us.
Yes, so Oh Tae-seok, he's considered one of the most brilliant playwrights of Korea, and he's most known for his performances that contain ideas of Korean traditional themes and ideas.
And today you bring us his latest production, right?
So Moonlight of the River Paekma is his most recent production. It's an award-winning performance that takes place in Korea, both in the present and in a time when Korea was ruled by the Silla and Baekje dynasties. Take a look.
Round and round, this shaman, dressed in a traditional robe, slowly spins his sword as he dances across the stage. Here, people can go back and forth from this life to the afterlife, opening the doors to what could have been. And this shaman leads the way, holding the power to travel through time. Fast forward to the present. This grandmother's sick. And she's just had a vision of her granddaughter, Sundan, who's the reincarnated form of Kumhwa, an assassin sent to kill King Uija of the Baekje kingdom. The king falls in love with her and lets her stab him. But his death results in a tragic tear between the two kingdoms, and it's up to Sundan to mend the rift.
The girl goes back to the 1400s so that the Silla and Baekje kingdoms can exist together. It's been 64 years since the start of the Korean War, and the people of both Koreas should want to be together as well. That's what this play is about.
2014 marks the 30th year anniversary of the established Wokwa Repertory Company. Since their start in the 80s, the group has produced over 13 original plays. The company has seen dozens of awards for their unique performances that highlight the importance of communication and relationships within humanity. Moonlight of the River Paekma was first performed in 1993 and is being restaged to celebrate the group's success in the theater. A success that is attributed to the close working relationship between director Oh and his actors, some of whom have made it to the big screen, but have decided to come back to where they started.
It's been a while since I've been in the theater. The actors have so much more energy, and now that I've aged, I'm having a hard time following their power. The play is the basics of this industry, and that's why I've come back. The Mokwa group is giving me another chance to refresh and approach acting with the enthusiasm of a newcomer.
It's a story that sings to the hearts of Koreans, a story about righting a wrong and learning to live in harmony. Mokwa has a reputation for their clever and original content that doesn't fail to entertain, and this performance is no exception.
Now, Yoon-hee, I know that he has other very well-known works, and are there, what else have they done to celebrate the 30th anniversary?
Right, so this is a big year for them. So earlier this year, they started off with the performance Bicycle, another award-winning play, and this performance was about a small town attempting to overcome a huge tragedy, where a huge fire took over the town.
Right, and it seems like healing and mending scars and are common within his works. Did that performance have something to do with the Korean War as well?
So Oh Tae-seok is very heavily influenced. All of his works are heavily influenced by the Korean War. So he himself was a refugee of the war, and so as a young boy, he saw many scenes of violence and war. And as a result, in his works, he wants to show the repercussions of violence on the people of Korea, on the people who are sidelined and affected by these things. And so in his plays, you can see these images of violence and of healing, because he wants, in the end, everyone to come back together and unite.
And definitely a great performance on this day, marking the 64th anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War. All right, thank you so much for that, Yoon-hee.
My pleasure.
that's just about all from me at this hour. I'm Moon Gun-young. Check back with us at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.